Texas has four cities that everyone knows: Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin. The four corners of the Texas Triangle, the corridor that absorbed most of the state's corporate relocations, population growth, and national attention over the past 2 decades. If you follow the news about Texas, you have heard about all of them. Then there is El Paso. El Paso sits in the far western tip of Texas, more than 550 miles from San Antonio, which is the nearest major Texas city. That is roughly the same driving distance as Boston to Pittsburgh, mostly through the Chihuahuan Desert with very little in between. El Paso is closer to Phoenix, Arizona than to Dallas. It is closer to Santa Fe, New Mexico than to Austin, the state capital. It runs on Mountain Time while the rest of Texas runs on Central. The clocks are 1 hour behind, which is a small thing until you realize it is also a geographic statement about how far El Paso actually sits from the Texas most people picture. And unlike every other major Texas city, El Paso cannot sprawl. Dallas spreads across flat Trinity River plains in every direction. Houston has paved over 670 square miles of Gulf Coast flatland. El Paso has the Franklin Mountains running directly through its center from north to south, splitting the city into an east side and a west side connected only by mountain passes. The desert closes off everything else. The mountain range that makes El Paso visually striking is also the reason the city is denser and more contained than any Sunbelt city its size would otherwise choose to be. It did not pick that form. The terrain picked it. El Paso is a top 25 American city by population, larger than Denver, with a military base inside its city limits bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island. And in the national conversation about Texas, it is almost never mentioned. What is happening there is simply so different from what is happening everywhere else in the state that the same framework does not really apply. So to understand why El Paso feels the way it does, you have to start across the river. El Paso is a border city that happens to sit inside Texas. That distinction matters more than it might seem, because border cities operate on a different logic than inland cities, and El Paso's particular border location defines everything about its economy, its demographics, and its future in ways that have nothing to do with the business climate in Austin or the real estate market in Dallas. Directly across the Rio Grande from El Paso, 1 mile from downtown, is Ciudad Juarez. Juarez has approximately 1.8 million people. El Paso has approximately 679,000, making El Paso the smaller half of its own metropolitan area. The combined region, the border plex, has a population of about 2.7 million and a combined gross domestic product of around $70 billion. In most American cities, the most important piece of urban infrastructure is the highway interchange. The on-ramp that connects a suburb to a downtown, the interchange that routes freight between two interstates. In El Paso, the most important piece of urban infrastructure is a bridge. The Paso del Norte Bridge, which has connected downtown El Paso to downtown Juarez, at that location in some form for over 250 years, handles millions of crossings annually. In 2021 alone, over 2.3 million pedestrians and 4.4 million passenger vehicles crossed through El Paso's 3 international bridges into Juarez. The bridge that ranks second in the entire United States only to San Isidro in pedestrian crossings is not in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago. It is in El Paso. Stand on downtown El Paso's street grid and look south, and you are looking directly at the urban core of another country. No other major American downtown has this configuration. El Paso's most important road does not run east toward the rest of Texas. It runs south across the river. The numbers behind that bridge reflect just how consequential that orientation is. In 2024, the border plex processed approximately $105 billion in U.S. and Mexico trade through its ports of entry, roughly 19% of Texas's total cross-border commerce, second only to Laredo. Juarez has over 300 export factories employing more than 300,000 workers in electronics, automotive components, and medical devices. El Paso's role in this system is the logistics side. The warehouses, the distribution centers, the customs infrastructure, the place where goods cross the bridge and enter the American supply chain. Together, the two cities form what economists describe as the largest bilingual, binational workforce in the Western Hemisphere, which is an impressive credential that appears in precisely 0 Texas tourism campaigns. The manufacturing corridor is shifting upward too. Computer and electronic product manufacturing in the Juarez-El Paso corridor grew 87% between 2023 and 2025, driven by Taiwanese electronics companies moving production out of Southeast Asia. Juarez now accounts for almost 2/3 of Mexico's rapidly growing exports of data center computing machines. Medical equipment manufacturing expanded 41% over the same period. The border plex is significantly larger and more sophisticated than the regional stereotype, and moving toward higher wages and more skilled work than the maquiladora economy it is replacing. Which brings us to the decade that changed Texas and largely skipped El Paso. Between roughly 2010 and 2023, Texas became the dominant destination for corporate relocations in the United States. Tesla moved its headquarters to Austin. Oracle followed, Apple expanded dramatically, Dell was already there. Financial services companies fled New York regulation for Dallas. The tech industry, the corporate migration, the population influx, the venture capital, all of it concentrated in what Texans call the Texas Triangle, the corridor connecting Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. It was a genuine and dramatic economic transformation. If you were in those cities during that decade, you felt it everywhere. In the construction cranes, the rising rents, the traffic that appeared on roads that had no business having traffic, the restaurants that somehow had 2-hour waits on a Tuesday. El Paso received almost none of this. Part of the reason is geographic. The companies relocating to Texas were choosing between triangle cities based on proximity to each other, airport connectivity, and the talent concentrations that growth had already created. El Paso was 550 miles from the nearest node in that network. But there is an urban design reason too. The companies driving the Texas miracle wanted flat developable land for campuses, suburban ring roads, and the interchangeable Sunbelt geography that makes a place easy to build on quickly. El Paso has a mountain range through its middle and an international border on its southern edge. Its most notable landmark from the air is a military installation larger than Rhode Island. Its street grid runs south toward Mexico. None of this appears on a corporate site selection checklist. This sounds like a city that got left out, and it partly is. But the triangle's success has produced specific problems El Paso completely avoided. Dallas office vacancy rates pushed past 25% recently. Austin's housing costs rose so dramatically that its primary competitive advantage over coastal cities largely evaporated. Oracle announced it was moving to Nashville. The boom cities are managing the hangover from a decade of explosive growth. El Paso is managing different problems entirely. Here is where El Paso's story gets genuinely unusual. Fort Bliss encompasses 1.12 million acres, which is larger than the state of Rhode Island. It is the U.S. Army's second largest installation, the largest TRADOC training site, the Army's largest maneuver area, and the country's largest contiguous tract of restricted airspace. It hosts the 1st Armored Division, the Army's premier armored warfare unit. It employs tens of thousands of military and civilian personnel and functions as the largest single employer in the El Paso metropolitan area. Urban planners have a term for cities organized around military installations: garrison cities. They have a recognizable physical form: housing developments scaled to troop counts, commercial strips built around the predictable needs of a rotating military population, infrastructure that follows base growth cycles rather than market cycles. When Fort Bliss absorbed the 1st Armored Division from Germany under the base realignment and closure process, El Paso had to build housing and services for tens of thousands of new residents quickly. A triangle city would have sprawled outward. El Paso could not. The mountains were already there. The city compressed into the available space instead. Fort Bliss functions as a stabilizing economic anchor of a type that most American cities simply do not have. Federal military spending does not contract during recessions in the way that private sector employment does. It does not relocate to another state because the regulatory environment changed. It does not close when tech stocks fall or interest rates rise, or a major corporation decides Nashville is trendier. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, cities across the country were hemorrhaging jobs. El Paso was fine. Not because El Paso's economy was booming, but because Fort Bliss was expanding, triggering a multi-billion-dollar 130-project construction program that pumped money into El Paso's economy at exactly the moment the national economy was contracting. The rest of Texas recovered from 2008. El Paso barely noticed 2008. That is what 1.12 million acres of federal military installation inside your city limits does for your economic resilience. It is not glamorous, it does not generate think pieces in business publications. It works. So the economy works. That part is worth saying plainly before the next section because the next section is harder. Trade volume through the border is growing. Fort Bliss is stable. The border plex, warehousing, and logistics sector expanded significantly through the nearshoring boom. Sales tax revenues hit record highs recently. The economy is moving, and El Paso is still losing people to the rest of Texas. Between 2024 and 2025, the city of El Paso lost approximately 2,200 residents, the largest single-year decline ever recorded for the city and the largest of any Texas city that year. The city has grown only 0.6% since the 2020 census, the slowest rate since the Great Depression. Every year since 2011, when Fort Bliss finished expanding, El Paso has posted net negative domestic migration. The Census Bureau estimates a net loss of 7,300 people to other U.S. counties in 2024 alone, and nearly 18,000 since 2020. The pattern is specific. Working-age adults are leaving, especially younger college-educated El Pasoans heading for cities with more career diversity, higher wages in most sectors, and the professional networks that come from being inside a major growth corridor rather than 550 miles outside one. El Paso produces graduates at UTEP and then watches a significant portion of them get on Interstate 10 and head east toward Austin or Dallas-Fort Worth, where the job market is deeper and the salary ceiling is higher, and the sense of momentum is something you can feel in the streets. The mayor of El Paso recently said that population numbers tell you whether people feel they have opportunity and a strong quality of life, which is a careful mayoral way of saying that El Paso's population numbers are currently saying something the city's leadership does not love hearing. The city has a strong floor, the military, the borderplex, the federal employment base, and a ceiling that keeps getting harder to raise because the people most likely to raise it keep deciding that Austin is a better bet for their career. The birth rate compounds this. El Paso County births have dropped 24% since 2015, more than twice the national decline rate. School enrollment, which topped 180,000 as recently as 2012, is projected to fall below 140,000 by the early 2030s. These are demographic signals that tend to precede sustained urban decline, and El Paso's elected officials are taking them seriously. Here is the counter-argument, and it is a real one. The Texas Triangle is managing the specific problems that come from a decade of explosive growth: high housing costs, infrastructure strain, office vacancies, the cooling of a market that overbuilt for a boom that moderated. El Paso has none of them. Its housing market is stable and affordable. Its economy is tied to federal military spending and binational manufacturing and logistics, three sectors that are structurally different from the tech and corporate relocation economy, driving triangle volatility. It does not boom with the triangle. It does not contract with it either. Whatever the next cycle brings to Dallas and Austin, El Paso will feel it differently. El Paso has also been quietly accumulating the infrastructure of a more sophisticated economy. If U.S.-Mexico manufacturing continues shifting toward higher value goods, the borderplex is positioned to absorb that growth in ways a triangle city cannot, because the triangle does not share a border with one of Mexico's most important manufacturing regions. And unlike the triangle's flat sprawl, El Paso's compressed urban form means the warehousing and logistics infrastructure is already concentrated near the bridges rather than scattered across hundreds of miles of suburban highway interchanges. The geography that kept corporate America away turns out to be exactly the geography you want if your economy runs north-south across a river rather than east-west across a freeway. None of this solves the brain drain. El Paso is still losing the young and educated at a rate that compounds over time, still watching graduates get on I-10 and head east towards cities with deeper labor markets and more visible momentum. The demographic trajectory is real and the city knows it. But El Paso was always an anomaly, a top 25 American city sitting in a desert, boxed in by mountains on one side and an international river on the other, running on a binational economy that the rest of Texas does not share and cannot replicate. The isolation that kept it out of the Texas miracle is the same isolation that is keeping it out of the Texas correction. The desert tends to outlast the boom. El Paso is counting on that.